The first thing she learned was the cold. It was not the crisp, fleeting chill of a Casterly Rock dawn, a thing of salt spray and sea air that vanished with the sun. This was a different beast entirely. It was a cold that lived in the stone, a cold that had soaked into the marrow of the world and never left. It was the cold of permanence. A girl of 7, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes like chips of green glass, stood on the battlements of Winterfell, watching her breath plume in the air. Below, boys her age, boys who were now her brothers, sparred with wooden swords in the muddy yard. Robb, with his auburn hair and serious face, and the dark-haired bastard, Jon, who moved with a sullen grace the true-born son lacked. They grunted and yelled, their faces red with effort, their tunics stained with sweat despite the bite in the air. "They are strong," a voice said beside her. Catelyn Stark, her new mother, pulled a fur-lined cloak tighter around her own shoulders. She did not offer one to Cersei. The girl had her own, a fine wool cloak from the south, but it felt thin and useless here. "In the north, we must be strong." Cersei did not look at her. She watched the boys. She saw Robb's directness, his earnest, clumsy power. She saw Jon's caution, the way he waited for an opening, the flicker of something hungry and resentful in his eyes. She understood them in a way she knew this tall, grim woman beside her never would. Catelyn saw suns. Cersei saw pieces on a board. Robb was a rook, powerful in a straight line. Jon was a knight, trickier, moving in ways you didn't expect. "Weak," a voice in her head whispered. It sounded like the father she barely remembered, a man of gold and fury who had looked at her as if she were a flawed casting, a beautiful goblet with a crack running through it. Honor is the cloak of fools who are too afraid to seize what they need. Her father, Tywin Lannister, had sent her here after her mother's death. Her own birth, he had said in a letter to Lord Rickard Stark, was the cause. He could not look at her without seeing his dead Joanna, and so he had sent his 7-year-old daughter 1,000 leagues away to be fostered by the Starks, a political arrangement sealed in grief and disgust. Her twin, Jaime, remained at Casterly Rock, a golden boy to be forged into his father's heir. She was the discard. "Come inside, Cersei," Catelyn said, her voice not unkind but weary. It was always weary when she spoke to her. "You'll catch a chill." Cersei finally turned, her green eyes meeting Catelyn's blue ones. She gave the woman a small, perfect smile, a smile she had practiced for hours in the reflection of a polished shield. "Of course, my lady," she said, her voice a model of quiet obedience. As she followed Catelyn Tully Stark back into the suffocating warmth of the great hall, she glanced back at the sparring boys. Robb had finally knocked Jon down and was standing over him, laughing, offering a hand up. Jon ignored it, pushing himself to his feet with a scowl. Cersei's smile became real for a moment, a fleeting private thing. They thought this place, this endless winter and its dour people, would break her. They thought they could forge a Lannister lion into a direwolf. They were fools. Gold was stronger than iron, and winter was not an obstacle. It was a weapon. You didn't fight the cold. You became it. The years passed as seasons do in the north, long, hard, and unforgiving. Cersei grew, her golden hair a startling slash of sunlight in the gray halls of Winterfell. She learned to ride, not with the delicate grace of a southern lady, but with the grim endurance of a Northman. She learned to stitch, her fingers as nimble with a needle as any of her sisters, but while Sansa dreamed of knights and princes, Cersei embroidered lions devouring wolves in subtle, golden thread that only she understood. She learned the histories of the first men, the tales of the long night, and the endless, droning litany of the Stark line. She learned the most important lesson from Lord Eddard Stark himself. He was a quiet man, his grief for his dead father and brother a constant low hum beneath his skin. He treated her with a gruff, formal kindness that was, in its own way, more isolating than Catelyn's polite suspicion. He would sit by the fire, sharpening his greatsword, ice, and tell her of duty. "A lord's first duty is to his people," he said one evening, the Valyrian steel whispering against the whetstone. Robb and Jon sat nearby, listening with rapt attention. "He is their shield. He protects them from the winter, from invaders, from themselves. It is a burden, not a prize." Cersei, now a girl of 13, watched the firelight dance on his face. He truly believes it, she thought, a revelation that was both amusing and terrifying. He saw power as a weight. She had been raised, however briefly, to see it as a birthright. Her father, in the few letters he sent, never spoke of duty. He spoke of legacy. He spoke of strength. "But what if the people are weak, Lord Stark?" she asked, her voice soft. "What if they do not deserve protection?" Ned stopped his work. The hall fell silent. He looked at her, his gray eyes piercing. "No man is so high that he can judge who deserves to live and who does not," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We protect them all. That is the law. That is our honor." She inclined her head. "Yes, my lord." But she did not believe him. Honor was a set of rules the powerful forced upon the weak to keep them in line. She saw it every day. She saw how Catelyn's rigid adherence to propriety isolated Jon, creating a festering wound in the heart of the family. She saw how Ned's unwavering loyalty to his friend, Robert Baratheon, a drunken lecher who'd won a crown, blinded him to the realities of Southern politics. She cultivated Robb. He was her brother in all but blood, and he adored her. She was the brilliant, beautiful sister who understood his burdens. When he struggled with his sums, she showed him clever tricks to solve them. When he despaired over his swordplay, she pointed out his opponent's weaknesses with a startlingly keen eye. "You lead with your shoulder, Robb," she'd say, watching him train against Theon Greyjoy, the sullen Kraken hostage. "It gives away your strike. Be patient. Let him make the mistake." She taught him to think like a Lannister while wearing the skin of a Stark. She praised his strength, his honor, his name, all the while subtly undermining the lessons of his father. Honor was for the songs she'd suggest in quiet moments. Victory was for the living. Catelyn watched it all with a growing unease. "She has a hold on him," she told Ned one night, their bed a rare sanctuary of warmth and privacy. "She whispers in his ear, 'She is not one of us, Ned. Her heart is not of the North.'" Ned, ever loyal to the memory of the promise his father made to Tywin, sighed. "She's a girl cat. She has known nothing but Winterfell. She is what we have made her." But Catelyn knew better. As she watched Cersei move through the castle, a golden ghost in a world of gray, she felt a premonition of a winter far colder than any she had ever known. Cersei was not being made by the North. She was remaking it, stone by silent stone, into a fortress for her own ambition. She was a vine of golden roses, beautiful and deadly, slowly strangling the heartwood of the winter castle. The first true test of her influence came in the wake of Robert's rebellion. Robert Baratheon, now king, needed a queen to secure his throne. The great houses held their breath. A letter arrived from King's Landing, not for Ned, but for her. It was the first letter from her father in over a year. It was short and brutal. "Your brother Jaime is to marry Lysa Tully. You will be wed to a suitable northern lord. Lord Stark will arrange the match. Do not disgrace our name." Cersei read the letter in the godswood, the heart tree's red eyes weeping sap upon the snow. Jaime, her other half, given to that weak, simpering fish. And she, a Lannister of Casterly Rock, was to be married off like a broodmare to some hairy barbarian who smelled of pine and ale. Great John Umber's loudish son, perhaps, or a Karstark, with their grim faces and endless talk of vengeance. Rage, cold and pure, washed over her. It was the rage of a caged lioness. For a moment she wanted to burn the godswood down, to watch the ancient tree turn to ash. But the North had taught her patience. Fire was quick, hot, and foolish. Ice was slow, patient, and irresistible. She went to Robb. He He was 16 now, a man grown, broad of shoulder and earnest of face. She found him in the armory practicing his letters on a slate. He looked up, his face breaking into a warm smile when he saw her. "Cersei, I was just coming to find you. Father has received a raven. The king is to marry Lynesse Hightower." "I know," she said, her voice carefully controlled. She let a single perfect tear trace a path down her cheek. "I have received a raven as well, from my father." Robb's smile vanished. He stood, his height now rivaling his father's. "What is it?" She showed him the letter. He read it, his brow furrowing. "He cannot do this," Robb said, his voice rumbling with the indignation only the young and righteous can muster. "To marry you off without your consent? To some... It is an insult." "It is his right," Cersei whispered, playing the part of the dutiful daughter. "I am his to give." She looked up at him, her green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I always hoped I would stay here, with you, with my family." The word hung in the air between them. Family. She had spent a decade earning that word from him. Robb's hand clenched into a fist. He was his father's son, full of fire and honor, a dangerous combination she had learned to manipulate with surgical precision. "No," he said, his voice hard. "This is your home. You are a Stark in all but name. I will not let them send you away." He stormed off to confront Ned, his heart blazing with righteous fury. Cersei watched him go, the ghost of a smile on her lips. She had planted the seed long ago, the idea that she was not a Lannister guest, but one of their own, a wolf in lion's clothing. Now she would see if it had taken root. The argument in the Lord's Solar was loud enough to be heard in the yard below. Robb's passionate defense against Ned's weary pragmatism. "She is my sister," Robb roared. "She is Tywin Lannister's daughter," Ned countered. "It is his decision to make. We have no say in it." "Then we are cowards to let that man in the south dictate the fate of one of our own." In the end, a compromise was reached, brokered by a worried Catelyn. Cersei would not be married immediately. The decision would be deferred. But the victory was hers. Robb had defied his father for her. He had called her one of our own in a voice loud enough for the guards to hear. The North was beginning to learn a new loyalty, not just to the direwolf, but to the lioness who walked among them. She had faced her first political crisis and bent the will of Winterfell to her own. It was a small victory, but it was a start. The board was set. The game had begun. The Greyjoy rebellion was a gift. When Balon Greyjoy crowned himself King of the Iron Islands, Ned Stark called his banners and rode south with King Robert, leaving a 17-year-old Robb as the acting Lord of Winterfell, and at his side, his most trusted advisor, Cersei. While Robb was the face of authority, Cersei was its mind. She sat in the Solar, the Lord's seat still too large for her brother, and she learned the art of governance not from dusty books, but from practice. Maester Luwin would bring the ledgers, his brow furrowed with concern over dwindling grain stores for the coming winter. "Lord Robb," he would begin, but his eyes would stray to Cersei. "Double the watch on the King's Road, Maester," she would say, her voice calm and even. "Lord Manderly complains of bandits. Send 100 men under Galbart Glover's command to patrol his lands. Send the bill for their provisions to White Harbor. Lord Manderly can afford it, and it will remind him that his safety is bought with Stark steel." "And the grain stores?" Luwin would press. "Instruct the farmers in the western lands to plant barley instead of wheat this season. The yield is lower, but it grows faster and is hardier against the first frost. We will make up the difference with trade from the south after Lord Stark returns." She never called him father. The northern lords at first were dismissive, a green boy and a golden girl playing at governance, but the reports from their lands were undeniable. Justice was swift, taxes were collected fairly but inexorably, Disputes between houses that had festered for decades were settled with a cold, logical pragmatism that was entirely alien to the North's passion-fueled politics. She did it all in Robb's name. It was always, Lord Robb has decided, or by Lord Robb's command. She made him feel powerful, decisive, while she wielded his power like a finely honed blade. She forged him into the lord she needed him to be, respected, strong, and utterly dependent on her counsel. When the war was won and Ned returned, he brought with him a hostage, Balon Greyjoy's last surviving son, Theon. Ned walked into his solar to find Cersei and Robb bent over a map of the North, charting new trade routes. The room was warmer than he remembered, the administration more ruthlessly efficient. He felt like a stranger in his own home. His reunion with his family was joyous, but a shadow lingered. He saw the way Robb looked to Cersei for confirmation before speaking. He saw the deference the household guards showed her. He saw the quiet confidence in her that had replaced the girlish obedience she had once feigned. The confrontation came a week later. He found her in the glass gardens, the humid air a stark contrast to the biting wind outside. "You have done well in my absence," Ned began, his voice heavy. "The North is orderly." Cersei turned from a cluster of blue winter roses, her smile serene. "Robb has a fine mind for it. He only needed the confidence." "It was not Robb who ordered the execution of the Risewell boy for poaching, was it?" Ned's voice was quiet, but hard as iron. "The law is a whipping for a first offense." "The boy was the son of a knight in service to Lord Risewell. He was stealing Stark grain to sell, not to eat. He was making a political point that our reach was weak. I had Robb make a stronger one." Her eyes, green as summer grass, held no apology. "The poaching has stopped." "That is not our way." Ned's voice rose. We are merciful." "Mercy is a luxury," Cersei countered, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more force than his shout. "It is a thing you show your friends, your family, to your enemies, or to those who test you. You show strength. You show them the consequences of defiance. You have lived by your honor, Lord Stark. I have lived by my wits. I have kept your house safe and strong. Is that not a lord's first duty?" She had used his own words against him. He stared at her, this beautiful, terrifying woman he had raised as a daughter. He had tried to instill in her the values of the North, of the Starks, but he saw now that he had failed. He had not raised a wolf. He had sheltered a lioness, and she had spent her years not learning his ways, but studying his weaknesses. And the greatest of them, she now knew, was his honor. Years later, the past returned to Winterfell in the form of a king. Robert Baratheon, fat and red-faced, rode north with his court, his high-tower queen, and a cloud of southern intrigue. The official reason was to celebrate 2 decades of peace. The true reason arrived in a raven scroll clutched in Catelyn's hand, a secret message from her sister Lisa. The Lannisters have murdered Jon Arryn. And Robert had another purpose. He stood before the hearth in the great hall, a flagon of ale in his hand, and looked at his oldest friend. "Ned," he boomed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "I need a new hand. I need you." The court of Winterfell fell silent. Every eye was on Lord Stark. Catelyn's face was a mask of dread. Robb looked from his father to Cersei, his expression uncertain. That night the arguments raged. In the Lord's bedchamber, Catelyn pleaded with Ned not to go. "It is a pit of vipers, Ned, my sister's letter. If the Lannisters are involved, they will kill you too." But it was Cersei's argument, delivered in the quiet of the godswood under the bleeding eyes of the heart tree, that was the most potent. She found him there, seeking solace in the silence. "You cannot go," she said. It was not a plea, but a statement of fact. "Robert is my king," Ned said, his voice ragged, "and he is my friend. I have a duty." "Duty?" She laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "You have a duty to the North, to your family, to Robb, who will one day have to rule this land. What will he learn from you if you abandon him to answer the summons of a drunken fool who has not managed his own kingdom properly?" "You do not speak of the king that way," Ned growled. "I speak the truth. You know I do." She stepped closer, her golden hair a halo in the moonlight. "They will destroy you, Ned, you and your precious honor. You are a wolf, and you do not belong in a snake pit. They will see you coming from a mile away. Your honesty is a weakness there. Your loyalty is a weapon they will use against you." Her words were a perfect echo of his own deepest fears. She saw the doubt in his eyes and pressed her advantage. "Stay," she whispered, her voice a seductive promise. "Stay, and teach your son. Fortify the north. Let the south poison itself. Why should we bleed for them? This is our home. This is the only thing that matters." For a moment, he wavered. Every instinct screamed at him to listen to her. She was right. He knew she was right. But then he thought of Jon Arryn, the man who had been a father to him, dead. He thought of Robert, the brother he had loved, lost in a sea of wine and sycophants. And he thought of the promise he had made to his dying sister, Lyanna, a promise he had kept secret for all these years. His honor, the thing Cersei saw as a flaw, was the very core of his being. He could not unmake himself. "I must go," he said, his voice firm with a resolve he did not feel. "I have no choice." Cersei looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "I see," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "Then go. Fulfill your duty." As he walked away, she remained standing before the heart tree. She felt no anger, no disappointment, only a cold, clear certainty. She had given him the chance to save himself. He had refused. Now, he was no longer her concern. He was an obstacle that was removing itself. Her concern was Robb. Her concern was the North. When Ned Stark's head inevitably fell in King's Landing, she would be ready. She would make sure his son did not make the same mistakes. The North would not weep, it would fight, and she would be the one to light the first fire. The news from the South came in waves, each worse than the last. First, the report of Ned's arrest for treason, a charge so absurd it would have been laughable were it not so deadly. Then, the whispers of King Robert's death in a hunting accident, a convenience so blatant it screamed of murder. Robb, his face a thundercloud of grief and rage, called the banners. The lords of the North descended upon Winterfell, their mail ringing in the courtyard, their voices a low growl of fury in the great hall. They were ready for war. They thirsted for southern blood. But they were a weapon without a hand to guide them. Robb, now Lord of Winterfell, was lost. He spoke of marching on King's Landing, of freeing his father, of killing the Lannisters. His plans were born of a son's love and a boy's fury. They were honorable, they were righteous, and they were doomed. Catelyn, her eyes red-rimmed from weeping, urged caution. She spoke of negotiation, of trading the captive Kingslayer, Jaime Lannister, captured by Robb in a stunning victory at the Whispering Wood, for Ned's life. It was Cersei who provided the path. She stood before the assembled lords in the great hall, a lone figure of gold and white in a sea of gray iron and dark furs. She did not shout. She did not weep. Her voice was cold and clear as the winter wind. "We cannot win their game," she began, her eyes sweeping over the faces of the great Jon Umber, Rickard Karstark, Rose Bolton. "Their game is played with lies and poison in the dark halls of the Red Keep. We are not them. To go south is to die in a land that is not our own, for a cause they will twist into treason." "Lord Stark is my father," Robb insisted, slamming his fist on the table. "I will not abandon him." "And he is the man who raised me," Cersei countered, her voice softening, a masterful performance of love and grief. "I would see him freed as much as any of you, but we must be clever. We cannot be what they expect us to be." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "They think we are savages, simple-minded Northmen who will rush headlong into their traps. They expect us to march on the capital, They expect us to sue for peace. We will do neither." She turned to Robb, her green eyes boring into his. "Your father went south to serve a king, and they have betrayed him. There is no king in the south worth serving, not the drunken ghost of Robert, nor whatever Lannister puppet now sits his throne." She raised her voice, letting it ring with a passion she had never before shown them. "Why should we bow to a southern crown? Why should we shed northern blood for southern quarrels? For 1,000 years before Aegon's conquest, the north was its own kingdom. A king who ruled from Winterfell, not from a perfumed court a world away. A king of winter." The great John Umber, who had been listening with a skeptical scowl, began to nod. Lord Karstark's eyes lit with a grim fire. "They have taken our lord." Cersei's voice dropped to a fierce whisper that carried to every corner of the hall. "They have stolen our honor. Let us take back our freedom. Let us forge our own destiny." She looked at Robb, her expression one of utter loyalty, utter belief. "Let them have their iron throne. We will have the North. We will have our own king." Silence. Then the great John Umber drew his massive sword, its steel ringing in the sudden quiet. He pointed it at Robb. "A king in the North!" he roared, his voice shaking the very rafters. "I'll have no king but a Stark." The hall exploded. Swords were drawn, not in anger, but in acclamation. "The king in the North!" they bellowed, the sound of physical force, a wave of iron and fury. "The king in the North!" Robb stared, stunned at the scene unfolding around him. He looked at Cersei. She stood beside him, her face serene, but her eyes burned with a triumphant fire he had never seen before. He was their king, but she was the one who had just crowned him. Catelyn watched from the gallery, her heart turning to ice. She saw it all with horrifying clarity. This was not a moment of spontaneous loyalty. This was a coup, a masterful, bloodless coup. Cersei had not just rallied the North to Robb. She had severed it from the Seven Kingdoms. She had turned Ned's capture from a crisis to be solved into an opportunity to be seized. And in doing so, she had likely signed her husband's death warrant. The boy king on the Iron Throne, Joffrey, would not suffer a rival. As the lords chanted his name, Robb Stark, the first king in the North in a millennium, felt a surge of power and purpose. He was the wolf, the hope of his people. He did not see the golden chains of counsel and manipulation that his brilliant, beloved sister had so carefully wrapped around his heart. He did not understand that a king who is crowned by another is never truly his own master. The North had a king, but Winterfell now and forever had a queen. The war that followed was not the one the South expected. The king in the North did not march his main host toward King's Landing. Instead, under Cersei's guidance, he fought a war of consolidation. He smashed a Lannister army at Oxcross, securing his western flank. He forged a hard-won, pragmatic alliance with the Riverlands, not through his mother's Tully connections, but through Cersei's cold negotiation of mutual interest against Lannister aggression. Cersei remained in Winterfell, the regent of a kingdom at war. Her correspondence flowed across the North, a web of command and control. She directed logistics, raised new levies, and dispensed justice with an iron hand. She did not inspire love as Ned had. She commanded respect, which she knew to be far more durable. She made the hard choices Robb in the field could not. When Rickard Karstark's sons were killed by Jaime Lannister in the Whispering Wood, she did not allow Lord Karstark to return home for their burial. She sent him a raven. "Your grief is the grief of the North. Your vengeance will be the vengeance of the North. Hold the line." It was brutal, but it kept the army intact. She kept Theon Greyjoy close, treating him not as Robb's friend, but as the valuable hostage he was. She entertained his ambitions of a crown with vague promises, all while sending subtle overtures to his sister, Asha, hinting that a more reliable Greyjoy could be recognized as ruler of the Iron Islands in exchange for their fleet's neutrality. She played one against the other, ensuring the Kraken remained tied up in its own harbor. Her greatest challenge and greatest victory came from within. Lord Roose Bolton, the Leech Lord, was a man whose ambition was matched only by his caution. He sent feelers to her, quiet suggestions of a separate peace, of a north ruled by more practical hands. He expected to find a kindred spirit, another player of the game. He found a master. Cersei summoned him to Winterfell under the pretense of a war council. They met in the Lord Solar, the flayed man banner of the Dreadfort, hanging limp beside the direwolf of Stark. "The war is costly, my lady," Bolton began, his voice a soft, unsettling whisper. "The Lannisters have the gold of the rock and the food of the reach. We have pride and snow." "We also have the singular advantage of a unified purpose, Lord Bolton," Cersei replied, her fingers steepled before her. She did not offer him wine or warmth. "Purposes can change," he hissed. "Loyalties can be reassessed." Cersei leaned forward, her green eyes pinning him. "Let me tell you what I have reassessed, my lord. I have reassessed the tax ledgers of the Dreadfort for the last 10 years. They are a work of fiction, artfully crafted to hide the fact that you have been skimming a tenth of your revenues from your lords and another tenth from your duties to Winterfell. I have reassessed the reports of the hangings on your lands, which far exceed any reasonable measure of justice and speak more of terror as a tool of compliance." Bolton's pale eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "And I have reassessed your correspondence," she continued, her voice dropping lower. "A raven flies from the Dreadfort to Casterly Rock twice a moon. I know. I have been reading them for months." She slid a small scroll across the table. It was his own handwriting, sealed with his own sigil, an offer of alliance to Tywin Lannister. Roose Bolton, a man who had never shown fear, felt its cold touch. "You see, my lord," Cersei said, a faint, cruel smile on her lips. "You think we are playing the same game, but you're playing for a title. I am playing for a kingdom. Your life is now forfeit. However," she leaned back, "your mind for strategy is useful. Your men are loyal to you, for now. You will return to the army. You will serve my brother, the king, with unswerving loyalty. You will be his most devoted bannerman, and you will know that if you take one step out of line, this letter will be nailed to the gates of every castle in the north, and my brother will send me your head. Am I understood?" Bolton, for the first time in his life, was outplayed. He bowed his head. "Yes, my lady." He was her man now, not by loyalty but by fear. Cersei preferred it that way. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Ned Stark languished in a black cell. Tywin Lannister, now hand of the king to his grandson Joffrey, had no intention of executing him. A live Ned Stark was a bargaining chip. A dead Ned Stark was a martyr. The war ground into a bloody stalemate. The North was unbreakable, a fortress of ice and will, ruled by a lioness in Winterfell. The South was richer, but fractured, with Stannis and Renly Baratheon now pressing their own claims to the throne. Cersei had won. She had forged an independent kingdom. She had outmaneuvered her enemies, both external and internal. She stood on the battlements of Winterfell, looking out over the snow-covered lands, and felt a quiet, satisfying sense of ownership. This was hers. She had made this. But the North remembers, and it holds its secrets. One evening, Maester Luwin sought her out, his face graver than usual. He carried a small, leather-bound scroll, its seal that of the Night's Watch. "A message from the Lord Commander, my lady," he said, "for the king. The king is at war. I handle his correspondence." She took the scroll and broke the seal. Her eyes scanned the familiar panicked words. Wildlings gathering in the thousands, rumors of others, of the dead walking, a plea for more men, for support from the crown. Cersei read it twice. She thought of the stories old Nan used to tell by the fire, tales of grumpkins and snarks, of the Long Night and the White Walkers, children's stories. Superstitious nonsense meant to frighten peasants into obedience. The real threat was South. The real threat was the Iron Throne. The real threat was her father, Tywin Lannister, and his endless ambition. This was a distraction. The ravings of a brotherhood of criminals and exiles desperate for attention. She walked to the fireplace, the scroll held loosely in her fingers. The real winter was the war. The real darkness was the Game of Thrones she was so close to winning. "What shall I tell the Lord Commander?" Maester Luwin asked, his voice anxious. Cersei looked at the report one last time, at the desperate plea from the edge of the world. Then, without a word, she tossed it into the flames. The parchment blackened, curled, and turned to ash. "Tell him the king has no men to spare," she said, her voice flat and final. "The concerns of the wall must wait. We have a war to win." She turned away from the fire, her mind already back on supply lines, troop movements, and the next political maneuver. She did not see the ash of the raven's message drift up the chimney and out into the endless, darkening sky. She did not feel the true cold, the ancient, patient cold, gathering its strength far to the north. She had broken the north, yes. She had bent it to her will, reforged it into a weapon, a kingdom. She had become its queen in all but name, and in her magnificent singular victory she had doomed it completely. The lioness had taught the wolves how to fight men, and left them utterly unprepared for monsters. The real North was coming for them all, and this time it would not be denied. The world continues beyond the frame. What do you think? Was Cersei's ruthless pragmatism the only thing that could have secured northern independence, or did her ambition blind her to the true threat, ultimately costing the North everything? Let us know in the comments.